Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar hosted by the Workforce Education and Development Program, Organization Development and Change at the Pennsylvania State University. This session is part of our monthly webinar series. My name is Azza Al-Hajri. I'm a doctoral student in Workforce Education and Development Program at Penn State. I will be moderating today's webinar alongside my colleagues Masha Yumol, who is also a doctoral student in the same program, and Jose Sandoval, a PhD candidate in the Learning, Design and Technology program at Penn State. We are excited to engage with you using the feature of the Zoom platform. At the end of this presentation, there will be the Q&A session. If you want the presenter to address your question, please type it in the Q&A section. If you encounter any technical issues during the webinar, please let us know using the chat box. Our online Master of Professional Studies in Organization Development and Change is designed for professionals who want to gain skills and knowledge necessary to lead organization change effectively. Additionally, we offer a PhD program in Workforce Education and Development with concentration in Human Resource Development and Organization Development. Since April 2020, we have established a continuous monthly free webinar series featuring experts from around the globe. Today, we are excited to present Organization Development and Change Management Top Trends for the Future by Dr. Rothwell, Dr. Zaballero, and Dr. Sadiq. Our first speaker is Dr. Rothwell. PhD is a distinguished professor in the Workforce Education and Development Program at the Pennsylvania State University. Before becoming a professor, he had nearly 20 years of practical work experience in OD and HR, in government, and the multinational business. Since arriving at Penn State University in 1993, he has established 3 consulting companies: one personal care home for the elderly, 1 motel, and 1 company to rent vacation home. He is author, co-author, editor, or co-editor of 164 books, and he has presented 1,600 talks on every continent except Antarctica. He won the 2022 OD Network Lifetime Achievements Award. Our second speaker is Dr. Zaballero, PhD, a senior partner of Rothwell and Associates with a dual title PhD in Workforce Education and Comparative International Education from Penn State. She has been a certified professional in talent development since 2009. She led a project to examine instructional design competencies, was a researcher and subject matter expert in developing a competency model and career map for the advanced commercial building workforce, and was part of the team that developed ATD's talent development framework. Dr. Aline recently co-authored Revolutionizing the Online Learning Journey 2024 and the Successful Supervisory Leader Series 2024 and 2023. And our third speaker is Dr. Farhan Sadiq. PhD is an assistant professor of adult learning and leadership at Kansas State University and chief of research at Rothwell and Associate. He holds a PhD in Workforce Education and Development from Pennsylvania State University, along with a graduate certificate in Organization Development and Change Essentials and Consulting Skills from Penn State. He was recognized as an emerging OD practitioner by the Organization Development Network in 2023. For a more detailed overview of their remarkable achievements and contribution, please feel free to visit the Eventbrite page for this webinar. You will find additional information about our esteemed speakers there. Now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming our speakers today. Dr. Sadiq, the floor is yours.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Azza, for the wonderful introduction. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Very excited to see some of our friends, colleagues, the names on the participants list. I really appreciate taking some time to listen to us. And today, specifically, we are going to talk about the trends impacting organization development and some proposed framework that we have proposed and will be published soon. So if you want to learn more, there will be opportunity to go through the journal article that's coming up based on the topic that we're going to discuss today. I'll just quickly skip through our introduction as that is a great job. Thank you. So today's agenda, as OD, organization development, is going through some shifts, and collaboration and employee engagement have become essential for success for any organization. Traditional top-down approach is not as functional. Rather, what organization development believes the bottom-up approach is becoming more essential to adopt those changes. That's what the focus of OD, and that's where we came up with the OD framework that we're going to propose with three specific target that we analyzed through the research: global connectivity, technological integration, and human-centered approach. On those three specific categories, we identified some trends that we're going to discuss today. And finally, we're going to talk about how OD practitioners are professionalizing OD as a field, and those practices and trends are adapting with their practices. I want to share some reports. These reports were very helpful and fundamental to our research and helped us to develop those information that we came up with the trend and framework. First of all is the impact radar for 2024. There is report from World Economic Forum. There is also report about on the future of work 2024. And there are multiple other reports that we have used, and I did went through to understand what the future of work holding for us and how that's impacting OD as a field. So the framework I was talking about, OD trends framework, we identified and explored the trends impacting OD, and we proposed this inquiry framework where the forward-looking framework examines how OD emerging global trends and how these changes shape the future of OD. The framework I outlined identifies three core elements integral to fostering adaptability within the OD practices. First, global interconnectivity, which examines how interconnected economies and cross-border operation influences organization development. Technological integration focuses on the impact of digital tools, AI. We all continuously talking about AI and the automation within the OD practices. And finally, human-centered adaptation. OD is always a human-centric approach and emphasizes the humanistic approach of OD to foster resilience and adaptability. So we are going to talk about some trends and practices around human-centered application. But first of all, I would like to invite you to scan the barcode you see on the screen. Also, there will be a link on the chat box that you can click. Throughout this presentation, we are going to talk about different trends such as global collaboration, collaborative network, job augmentation, job automation, big data predictive analysis, virtual reality, and also the anxiety and resistance to AI, employee well-being, and finally, diversity, equity, and inclusion. But as we come from different background, different workplace, all those trends are impacting us in different ways. But we want to know how, as an individual, it's impacting you. And if you scan the barcode on the screen, it's going to take you to a website where Mentimeter, where you will be able to share your thoughts as we explain each trend. You'll be able to share what you think about it, how it's impacting you. And at the end of this presentation, we're going to share our findings with you as well. With no further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Rothwell to start talking about the global connectivity.
Okay, thank you, Farhan, for the introduction. And change the slide. I'll get right into the presentation. So why should we care about global connectivity? Why is this useful? The question we should always ask whenever we're confronted with research findings is, so what, now what, then what? We should consider that. So what? Why do we care about this topic? Well, why it matters. Global decisions create ripple effects. So when things happen anywhere in the world, we know it has global consequences, and it affects and can affect all of us. It doesn't take much to think about examples recently. We have black swan events like COVID-19, where the pandemic started in an obscure Chinese city, Wuhan, and quickly spread to become a global event. And it turned out that the only way people could connect when they were going through things like government required lockdowns in China and elsewhere, the only way they could interact was through global connectivity. So using virtual methods has become critical in the ability to get work done and to interact among human beings. So OD practitioners have to consider diverse global contexts, and this is becoming clear over time. Next slide. So one of the consequences of the so what is cross-cultural adoption. And this came out of our findings. OD implications, we have a need to integrate cultural elements globally through migration and technology. Migration has become quite an issue, not just in the US, but globally. Many European elections recently have been swayed by immigrants coming from other parts of the world to the European Union, the EU, and of course, some would argue that the recent presidential election was swayed in whole or part by concerns about immigration over the southern border of the US. But at the same time, globalization sparks increasing need to be aware of workforce diversity. When we have a lot of migration and we have a lot of immigrants, this can facilitate the need for inclusive environments. And that's particularly true after we study how ugly some of the political debate became in the US during the recent election cycle. And so we have to ease off, and as OD professionals, our goal should be to create harmony, not ignore the source of conflict, but work with people to get through it. And some of those issues we have to deal with are language barriers. Many of the immigrants coming across the border are unable to speak English, or their English language skills are very poor. The same is true in the European Union. The immigrants there, many of them cannot speak the national language in the countries where they appear. And we have to respect cultural norms and understand that many cultural issues are taken for granted. That's the nature of national culture. People take certain things for granted and don't even realize that other cultures may have other ways of regarding the nature of marriage, the nature of child raising, child rearing, and many other factors, including work, how to go about work, whether to show up to work on time, whether to respect deadlines, and other cultural issues that may be introduced by a diverse workforce. Global collaboration, we have to be aware of the need to knowledge share across borders, as well as across generations, as well as across different functional areas of organizations. And we have to be able to work through decision making, and increasingly the technology gives us the tools that can dramatically accelerate the speed and the quality of decision making, the decision making process. But how we go about that can vary depending on the national culture. I can still remember some of my work and my 83 trips to China. And I noticed that when there were mixed groups of men and women in meetings, and there were mixed groups by age and by educational level and by levels on the organization chart, that some groups like women would be quiet because culturally they were discouraged from participating in mixed group events. If you're a facilitator working cross-culturally, you should be aware of those issues and come up with workarounds that will be culturally sensitive and yet get full participation from those you're working with. Cross-cultural integration means that we have to develop skills. The term cross-cultural competence is one the UN has worked with extensively, and it's many websites and many resources available on the nature of cross-cultural competence and how we might use it. So when we engage in change efforts, which of course OD is all about, we need to make sure that we are sensitive to cultural differences. And cultural means not just national borders, it can mean regional differences, and it can also mean corporate culture differences. Next slide. So, social systemic change. When we talk about globalization and interconnectivity, we have to realize that economies are interconnected globally. We certainly saw that during the pandemic, where supply chains were tied up. At one point, there were 1,500 Chinese ships off the coast of California waiting to unload, but the longshoremen were unable to unload so many ships, and there were restrictions on their interaction because of the pandemic. So we have to consider how economies are interconnected, and increasingly so in the modern world. Digital connectivity is critical in reshaping the way economies and social change is enacted. And geopolitical conflicts can certainly affect everybody. Just think of the global impact of the Ukraine conflict or the concerns over the Taiwan situation or concerns over the war in the Middle East between Israel and Hamas and other groups. So conflicts can affect everyone, and they can have, in some cases, unexpected consequences that organizational leaders must be prepared to deal with. Next slide. So OD, we have to consider these days the issue of what we call macro organization development. Some people call that trans organization development. It's all about the difference between organizationally focused change efforts and the world outside the organization. So traditionally, a lot of organization development work has focused inside organizations, how we bring about change on a company-wide basis, change on a division or department basis, team building efforts or other work with small groups, or even individual change efforts like coaching or executive coaching. But increasingly, we have to consider the world outside the organizations. So that talks about macro organization development. How do we deal with these structures, policies, and norms for lasting change? As an example, we can build a diverse workplace and appreciation for diversity within our organizations. But if the surrounding community or the surrounding nation is not sensitive to that appreciation of diversity, then how likely is it that that change will stick? So the point is, increasingly OD must be concerned about social change and not just organization change. And as part of that, technology can be very helpful in dealing with cross-boundary work. Next slide. So what is macro organization development? I like to talk about the difference between the picture and the picture frame. Think of the picture as the organization, the company, a specific organization. But the world outside that organization is the picture frame. And clearly the two are related. But just think about it. Isn't it really the case that the outside world is more influential to the inside world than the reverse? Meaning that changes inside a company may have implications for outside the organization, but for the most part, most change comes as imposed externally. And there are many examples. I mentioned black swan events where a small change can end up having ripple effects that go global. Another example are so-called gray rhino events, which are huge, massive changes that we tend to ignore or we don't see them. They creep up on us like a glacier, very slow but very massive. A good example of that is global demographic change. We all know the world's population is getting older. Why is that happening? Fewer children are being born worldwide, but because of healthcare advances, people are living longer, and as a result, the world's population is getting older. That has many implications for organizational leaders. We used to assume that many entry-level positions would be occupied by young people. Well, what do we do when there aren't enough young people to go around? And we're there. So that's one of the issues. So society can be the frame, the organization is the picture, and that can help us inform our thinking about change efforts. Next slide. So I'll turn it over to Farhan, but don't forget the Mentimeter, and you will be encouraged shortly to do some voting.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rothwell. All right, so now for the fun part, technology. I got the fun part of this presentation. So integrating technology isn't just about tools. It's about making work smarter and really about connecting people and creating smarter ways to collaborate, no matter where and how we work. When we talk about global trends, it's all about interdependence. That's what Dr. Rothwell was talking about, how everything connects and relies on each other. Well, when it comes to technology, it's all about integration. Next page. It's not just about getting the latest gadgets or tools, or it's about really making sure that we all work together smoothly, intentionally, and that we're achieving meaningful goals. So why does it matter? Technology is totally reshaping OD practitioners' approach to their work, transforming how strategies are designed and rolled out. And while that brings tons of exciting opportunities, it also comes with its fair share of challenges. Digital tools and AI are game changers. We know it. Everybody's talking about it. It's in the news, it's in movies, it's in all of our programming. They give you access to real-time data. Advanced analytics can uncover insights about how organizations behave, perform, and what they really need. But here's the catch. You've got to know how to make sense of all that data. So OD practitioners like ourselves, we need to have data literacy competencies and to know how to turn those insights into actual actions. And there's also then automation. It takes care of those repetitive, time-consuming tasks, making it more, giving us more time to focus on strategic, impactful work that drives real change. And this is the reason why technology is really, really important. So let's take a look at some of the technological trends. If you could go to the next slide, please. So the World Economic Forum is a great go-to source when it comes to technology trends. A few months ago, I think it was back in June, they released their flagship report, Top 10 Emerging Trends. They release this every year. Another report that just came out last month is Leveraging Generative AI. In there, they highlight some of the key things that are happening right now, and they're pretty amazing. One of them that you had mentioned and talked about was that the research is showing how artificial intelligence is making it easier for scientists to achieve things that they once felt was impossible, like curing cancer. And it's also speeding up the pace of discovery. And I think one of the things that's really exciting about it is that it takes the line between science fiction and real science, and the lines between it becomes really blurred, which can be exciting and also a bit frightening at the same time. And then there's their global collaboration, which Dr. Rothwell had mentioned. He was talking about the global collaboration that happens across boundaries, across organizations. And some of the things that are happening with that is that there is now a possibility to use synthetic data. And the reason why that's important, synthetic data lets us share and work with sensitive information without the risk of exposing everyone's personal details. It's the twin data set that's been created to mimic real data, but doesn't actually have or include anything that's connected or traced back to us as individuals. This breakthrough removes a lot of the barriers around privacy and security, making it easier for data to share things and unlock new opportunities. Researchers from different countries and different regions are able to come together, share their information together, and the real idea of collaborative knowledge and global knowledge really can expand even that much more. And then there's this idea of, I think I say it, Isaac. So Isaac, the integrated sensing and communication, which combines sensing and communicating into one powerful system. This makes it possible to collect and share data at the same time. You take, for example, a warehouse, and a warehouse using Isaac can track exactly the locations of its autonomous robots, keeping everything to run smoothly. And this is basically how all of your Black Friday items came to you within a few days. Isaac is also responsible for the environment mapping, which is what self-driving cars really rely on. And they use it to be able to map the roads and also detect somebody who's crossing the street. One of the other things that Isaac can also do is about infrastructure monitoring. They can predict and prevent power outages before they actually happen. It's really groundbreaking for a lot of different kinds of industries. And then there's also the AI-driven immersive reality tools, which is really making shopping a whole new experience. I don't know if any of you have ever shopped on Amazon and you wanted to buy a table or a desk, but you weren't sure if it was going to fit in your room or how it was going to look. And there was an option in there to have you look at it, and you'll put the camera and you could show it, and it'll show you what that item would actually look like in your room. Those are some pretty exciting innovations that are happening. It's like trying something before you buy it without ever leaving your couch. And then the other big thing is about virtual organizations. This is where teams or groups work together from different locations. Now, this is not new, but it's becoming much more common, where digital technologies to communicate, collaborate, and get things done is much more streamlined. Take, for example, Rothwell and Associates. It's a fully remote virtual organization. Advances in technology make this kind of setup not only possible, but it's efficient and allows us to streamline our operations and thrive in a distributed structure. We're able to collaborate with scholars from different states, different industries, and different areas, which is really exciting as well. But let's take a look at the specific trends in the context of organization development. Next slide. So this is where so much buzz about AI has been. It's been talked about for a while. Is AI taking over our jobs? Am I going to lose our job? Are we going to have nothing else to do because AI is going to be doing everything? Well, it's not hard to feel a little anxious about that. So let's start with the first one, the difference between job augmentation versus job automation. These are not the same thing. Job augmentation is about using AI to enhance what humans do, but not replace them. Think of AI as your teammate, not your competitor. It's where you can take the repetitive task, analyze it faster, or simply simplify the workflows, but you can also then focus more on what we do as humans the best: creativity, critical thinking, building relationships. And it also takes that mindset work where organizations need to build a culture that sees AI as a tool and complements human efforts, not substitute it. And it's also about working smarter and also together, which then leads into something that's really important. And for all of us who are in the workforce development field, as part of our core values, is about continuous development and also career planning. Employees will need to prepare for roles where humans and AI are collaborating as a norm. This is going to be the normal thing. That's going to be part of our everyday work experiences. But this is going to require upskilling, reskilling, learning new skills, and being able to get people up to par. It's not just about keeping up, though. It's about staying ahead by developing capabilities that AI can't replicate, like emotional intelligence, strategic thinking, and innovation. Well, at least for now, AI can't do that or is not better than we are yet. And there's also then personalized learning, which is also some of the things that a lot of us are really familiar with. AI itself can create tailored learning experiences for employees, identifying the gaps, delivering training, and if that fits the individual's needs, it's able to customize the development and the training specifically for that individual, which makes it much more relevant and effective for people. And of course, the most important of the future workforce is the requirement for us to be adaptable and agile. Being open to change and ready to pivot as new technologies and opportunities emerge will be the key to thriving in a world where humans and AI work hand in hand. And the biggest thing about the whole idea of agility is that almost every day there's a new tool coming up. And the tool that you may have been using yesterday may no longer work. It might be obsolete. So it's really important for us to stay ahead of these things. Now, Dr. Rothwell mentioned earlier about the Mentimeter, and Farhan introduced that to you. So don't forget to complete that as we're going over it. So the Mentimeter for augmented job augmentation on a scale of 1 to 10, impacting you individually. If it's impacting you significantly, it's a 10. If it's not, then it would be at 0. Now let's go and talk a little bit about big data and predictive analytics. So big data is another game changer for making smarter decisions. It allows us to rely on evidence-based guesswork without making it a guesswork, using predictive modeling to anticipate trends and outcomes. It also supports the whole idea of continuous monitoring, which it feels kind of like Big Brother kind of, but it tracks progress and adjusts strategies to real time. We can use predictive for hiring and using data to identify the best fit candidates and analyze that past hiring and success patterns. But there's a caveat to that. And we also know there's been some incidents that have happened because of bias. So if an organization, if the data of their hiring, their AI system is based on their hiring history, and they've hired predominantly male, the AI model may actually disregard female candidates. So that's something to really think about and consider. But again, big data is also on your Mentimeter. Some of you are already responding because I could see some of the results, and it looks like that's one of the important pieces that a lot of people are dealing with. And then the next one is about remote work. So as more teams work remotely or hybrid setup, which is a little bit of combination of both, technology is really helping us to rethink how we work together. It's kind of like right now. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. Dr. Sadiq is in Kansas, Dr. Rothwell is in State College, and tools like Zoom makes that possible. But it's not just about that ability, it's also considering the redesigning of the workflows and creating team dynamics that work in this new reality. As OD practitioners, focusing on team development, virtual communication strategies that allows us to work and communicate more effectively with each other. And you can't forget about the digital fatigue. I don't know about you, but I've experienced that pretty often. The whole idea that every place I go, I'm connected to somebody, whether it's through my phone, whether it's through the computer. So digital fatigue can actually be something that we're going to have to really consider about working in a healthier workplace and finding balance for people. It's not uncommon for me to work beyond the 9 to 5 working hours. Actually, I think that whole idea of 9 to 5 is probably atypical nowadays. Most people are working at 3 o'clock in the afternoon till maybe 3 o'clock in the morning. That's what I did yesterday. But Again, this is all about having the new norm based on some of the things that are happening. And one of the other tools, of course, and this is the one I'm really excited about, which is virtual reality and augmented reality. These are the digital experiences that I'm really excited about to explore, especially when it becomes much more affordable. These technologies are opening up huge innovative ways to learn and to work. Whether it's immersive training simulations or hands-on learning experiences, VR and AR is making it possible to engage with content like we've never had before. So imagine in the near future, who knows, maybe next year, instead of you watching this webinar on your computer, you put on a VR headset. It takes you into a conference room or an auditorium because, of course, hundreds of people come in to watch Dr. Rothwell. And then you see us there in front of the room, just as if we're doing this webinar face to face. Now that's exciting. I can't wait for that. And then, the last technological trend, and it's also on the Mentimeter, is the resistance to AI. Next page. When it comes to AI, as I stated earlier, it's not uncommon or unnatural for people to feel anxious or have resistance. It's really a big change. It's a big change individuals, it's a big change for organizations, it's a big change for our society. So to ease these concerns, as OD practitioners, we need to focus on building trust in regards to how AI is used, how it's used ethically, and how it's actually implemented effectively. So ethics and effectiveness are going to be important in regards to looking at AI. And I mentioned this also, it's also going to be important to help employees stay ahead by rapidly upskilling. As these new tools come up, the time to be able to implement and send those out and get your knowledge about those is very, very short. So it's going to be really important that we integrate those pieces of developing people while we're also implementing and launching those new tools. So this goes into the idea of fostering a future positive mindset. It's that kind of idea that embraces agility and growth. And it can go a long way from reducing fear and encouraging more adaptability. And one of the ways you can do that is through open conversations. By creating spaces for employees to share their concerns, where they can ask questions, where they can address their fears heads on, and even, build this whole idea of dialogue, of open culture and open dialogue, so that they understand what is happening with this AI system. These kinds of systems are going to be really important for OD practitioners, especially now and in the future. And of course, it's part of our OD philosophy, involving the employees in the process. Inclusive decision-making around AI helps people feel that they're part of the solution, not just affected by the changes itself. And lastly, in regards to work processes, workflow, utilizing things like scenario planning. This is a great tool to prepare for potential challenges and outcomes, and ensuring that everyone feels confident and ready to move forward. The big part about the technology and how it's impacting us and what we can do as OD practitioners is about empowering people to see AI as a partner, not necessarily as a threat. So before I pass it back to Dr. Rothwell, who is going to talk about the human connection or human-centeredness approach to all these trends, don't forget the Mentimeter. Dr. Rothwell?
Okay, thank you very much. Of course, as OD people, we're always interested in the human-centered approach, or at least we should be. But based on today's talk, I think you can see that the trends all look toward the increasing importance of socio-technical systems. And if you're not familiar with that branch of OD, which some consider a foundational branch, meaning it was one of the core elements that led to the development of organization development as a field of practice. Socio-technical systems is all about human and technology integration, finding ways for technology and human beings to interact effectively and in complementary ways rather than in other ways. And so the most famous example of socio-technical systems started, of course, in the coal mines in the UK when they invented air hammers, and they expected that they would get giant productivity increases as a result of the introduction of air hammers in coal mines. Instead, they got a plummeting production, they got high turnover of workers, and they had very angry workers whose whole work settings were upended by the use of technology that they were not prepared to use. There's a term for that, which we call the productivity paradox. It's a paradox in the sense that we think by introducing new technology that we will automatically get productivity increases. It would make sense, except for one little thing. Too often we focus on the black box of technology and we ignore the human element. And so that's what this section is about. Next slide. So again, why should we care? So what? Now what? Then what? So why it matters? Well, people are the drivers of change. We've all probably heard that well-known statistic that about 70% of all company change efforts fail to achieve their change objectives. And most of the reason for change failure centers around mismanagement of the human side of the enterprise. And that's where OD lives and should live. So people are the drivers of change, and getting them engaged and involved in the change effort rather than management making all the decisions and then handing it over to technology, and everyone is totally confused what to do next, which unfortunately too often happens. Here, we're interested in building that engagement so that we can facilitate group activities that promote interpersonal understanding. We have to realize that the use of technology in work, in human interaction, does change the human dynamic of work. So that's what Lean was just talking about in her section. There's a difference between working face-to-face and working virtually, and we have to basically reinvent the way we interact with people when we're interacting in virtual spaces. We want to integrate well-being metrics into organizational assessments instead of focusing purely on task issues and the outcome measures and the profitability. We have to consider the human element. How well are people working together? How well are people getting along? How do people feel about engagement levels? How we work together affects the quality and quantity of work results. Too often that's forgotten in the excitement over the application of exciting new technology. Next slide. So we have to consider global health, well-being, and happiness. You know, countries like Bhutan have substituted, rather than looking at GDP, they look at the global happiness levels in their country. And there's something to be said for that thinking, that we cannot focus solely on outcomes. We also have to consider happiness levels and well-being levels of people. And I think that's where OD can really contribute and help facilitate proper attention to that human side. And what happens if we don't do that? Well, then we see more of what we have now, which is a global suicide epidemic. If you have not been following suicide rates that started to spike during the pandemic and are still growing even today, not just in the United States, but worldwide, it's a troubling example of how ignoring well-being can cause real problems for people. So too often people, when they work virtually, they feel isolated. And we have to overcome that by inventing new approaches to involve people on an informal level. When you're working face to face, you can see people between meetings, you can stop them in the hallway, you can sit with them at the cafeteria and have lunch together and talk about things. But when you're working virtually, too often we just dial in, conduct the meeting, and hang up. And there's no opportunity for that informal interaction that is so important in maintaining human connectedness. So age is an issue in this. Happiness varies by age and region. Different parts of the world, different parts of each nation. These can be different. Geographical trends, we know that Nordic countries tend to rank the highest in happiness, and we know the US ranks somewhere in the middle in happiness levels. People from international settings who come to the US feel isolated. They're not used to situations where they're separated from their extended families. In many developing nations, the whole extended family lives in close proximity. You're never alone. But in the US, you are often frequently alone, and that can lead to feelings of isolation and loneliness and can affect happiness levels. So we just have to be aware of that. Youth and adolescent well-being, a big problem globally. If you're not aware of some of the trends worldwide, think about the so-called lying flat movement in China. Lying flat means young people just give up. They can't find a job. About 50% of the youth are unemployed, and they simply cannot find employment. And this leads to what they call the 4 no's. And I can't tell you exactly what they are, but they give up on finding a job, finding a mate to marry, raising children, buying a house and car. They just give up. Lying flat means you give up and you only work enough to make enough money to pay for a room, maybe one night at a time, and buy food maybe one day at a time. And the most extreme example of that is something called the let it rot movement, where not only do they give up, they start to actively try to sabotage things because they are so angry with the way things have turned out. Next slide. So we want to avoid that. And these trends tend to become global in scope. Things that start in China or in other countries sometimes make their way everywhere. So employee well-being and mental health, the phrase mental health always bothers me because we know in many cultures there is a stigma associated with mental health issues. Nobody has a problem if you tell them that you went to see a medical doctor for a physical illness. But if you say you went to see a psychologist, then people worry about you. Are you going to be one of those people that goes crazy and shoots their coworkers? So mental health has a stigma associated with it, not just in the US, but worldwide. We need to rethink that mentality of having a stigma associated with mental challenges. We need new terminology for it too. We want to foster psychologically safe, inclusive work environments, and it's part of overcoming that loneliness and isolation epidemic that we've seen. The issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion, given the trends toward international migration and immigration, is all the more important despite local elections that may lead to rollbacks. of DE&I efforts. Personally, I worry about that because I think we're planning a powder keg if we ignore the issues that come from cultural, racial, gender, and other differences. So, personal thought. But I think OD can contribute to overcoming those. Next slide. So here's the Mentimeter. I will turn it over, I think, to Farhan for this.
Thank you, Dr. Rothwell. Time to play with technology. I'm going to click on it. If you want to take one more minute, if you haven't responded to the Mentimeter yet, please scan the barcode, and there are all the trends listed that we talked about. At the last phase of this presentation, we're going to talk about the professionalizing OD, how we use those trends, and how OD is advancing. Before that, we want to see what you think. So I'll take a couple more seconds, and in the meantime, I'll try to see if the result works.
So this is when technology is actually pretty fun. Everyone, as you're filling it out, you should actually be able to see the results as you complete it. So if you all click on the QR code, in case Dr. Irv said he can't open it, you can see the results on it live as it's moving. And right now, the one that's trending the highest is employee well-being and mental health. That's the top. And in second, it looks like it's big data and predictive analytics. It's moving. It's almost like watching a racehorse. And then you have job augmentation and DE&I neck and neck. They're almost nose to nose. But still in the lead is employee well-being. Okay, Dr. Sadiq.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing the result. I'll just move on from here. And also, with the slide, we can also share the result with everybody. If they want to see the visual, please let us know. Okay, so final slides, professionalizing OD. We want to talk about how organization development is integrating and collaborating with other disciplines and how they are trying to adopt with these trends and changes that we are going through. We see a huge growth, and also there is a close alignment with change management and project management, but still organization development is grounded in rigorous research, and it ensures the methods and interventions are scientifically validated. Yet we trying to create our own space, even on the Academy of Management. There was a huge publication but focused on AI, but they're also talking about the change management. Different associations such as ATDH, RD is creating their own OD wings. Recently, just like a couple of months ago, we presented in the Octave conference hosted by ATD. So a lot of organization development focused activities and alignment we see in the growing phase. And also integrating with OD with strategic planning and cultural transformation effort is on the rise. We work a lot with the Middle East partners. Even one of our graduate, Dr. Fahad Al-Shwan, is working with Bechtel, and he's using a lot of OD practices, just some practical experience as we do some research with them, that they are using those tools and integrating them with their strategic planning. We see Google using a lot of those positions, and as we have done a lot of research around the job openings, we see a huge growth, like 400,000 job opening on organization development field. And finally, OD practitioners are adopting agile methodologies in OD practices. And then expanding skill sets, we see a requirement, we see a huge need of the competency studies that we just talked about before this presentation, and requirement for certifications. As you have seen, I have secured some certification or certificates from Penn State, doing a great job on there. We see a huge growth of OD programs. Even in next 2 weeks, we'll be in Bowling Green, we'll be in Sacred Heart University, talking about OD, talking about how we use simulation to teach OD practices and adopt more comprehensive strategies to develop OD skills. And finally, experiential development. We are also seeing a growth, and we're using case studies and simulation in OD practices. More than that, there are lots more activities that we explained in our upcoming papers. For the time limitation, that this is all, we kind of merged everything together to present in front of you. A lot of discussion, a lot of things that we have discussed. If you have any questions, please feel free to email to us. But we're going to open the floor for next 5 minutes to see if you have any questions.
So I know that we weren't able to share with you the image of the results. Somebody had asked for it. If you click on the link, it's on there, so you can see this is what the result was as of like 2 minutes ago, because it was still moving.
Yeah.
But at the end of it, it was employee wellness and mental health that had the highest impact, that all of you are saying is going to impact you the most.
And I see a lot of good dialogues going on the chat. As our Jose, are you going to show us some questions, or I can read some questions?
Yeah, thank you. So we have a couple of questions, but because of the time, I'm gonna pick one of the questions. So one of the question is, how do geopolitical conflicts impact organizational development?
Well, I think, let me answer that, or at least start to answer that. As I said, there's the picture frame approach. We can consider internally initiated change within organization and externally initiated change, but we can also consider how external events can affect the internal operations of the organization. I think COVID-19 demonstrated vividly that health concerns created by a pandemic can have monumental impact inside an organization. Some companies went totally virtual during the pandemic. I mean, Penn State did, for example, with our classes, but many employers also went virtual. In other words, the organizations made an effort to respond to external events. But we see that there was certainly a reactive element to that, meaning companies could have easily planned for pandemics. That prediction had been around for decades that we were going to experience one, but most organizations had no ready-to-go program to deal with epidemics or pandemics. So I think that's part of the answer, that we can start to use scenario planning to try to identify likely events that could, from the outside, that could impact our organization. And also we can consider, we just published a book on how the organization can take a social activist stance on issues that affect the issues in the world, more of a social activist stance. Think of the Walt Disney, Ron DeSantis fight in Florida, where the state passed a law that prohibited high school and elementary school teachers from talking about sexuality. And Disney came out and said they opposed that law. And there was a big fight, which is still not over, about what should be the role of a corporation in dealing with social issues. And I think we're just getting started with that issue.
Well, I think the other part too is that it's really clear that we don't live or work in isolation. And whether you want to, even if you take on this me first kind of concept and idea, you're still integrated and intertwined with people around us. And I think as OD professionals, it's really important that we stay attuned to these kinds of things, to ensure that there's adaptability, resilience, but it's also that compassion and understanding of what is happening to other people outside of our own concept of the world.
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Rothwell, Dr. Zaballero, and Dr. Sadiq. And thank you everyone for joining us today. On behalf of our Workforce Education Development, Organization Development and Change program, we hope you enjoyed today's sessions. If we don't answer your question, please feel free to email us or contact the presenter directly. We would love to hear your feedback on today's webinar, so please take a moment to complete the survey using the link in the chat box. Our next webinar is about fostering diversity and inclusion in the United Arab Emirates workplaces and United Arab Emirates Vision 2030 by Dr. Arman on January 31st, 2025 from 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern Time. You can find the registration link in the chat box. Also, we are delighted to extend a special invitation to all of you for the online component of our 2025 Workforce Ed OD&C conference, Navigating the Nexus, Exploring the Dynamic Interplay Between Social Change and Artificial Intelligence, scheduled for March 21st, 2025. We have an incredible lineup of speakers discussing this important topic, and we truly hope you can be part of this transformative experience. You will find more information soon in our website. Please find the link in the chat. Remember, registration for all our events is completely free and can be found in our website. We want to make sure everyone has the opportunity to join us. You can also stay and updated by the following of our social media platforms, including Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Thank you again for joining us today. We hope to see you soon. Have a great day and good night to our guests in different time zone. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.